Welcome, everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful morning. We're here in Vancouver, so it is still morning for us, but could be afternoon for you as well, or a different time of day. So thank you for taking the time. Today's session is on privacy and information in practice. So I'll be giving you some practical resources from Microsoft, as well as a foundational privacy impact assessment and sensitivity labels guide to help set you up well. Our first agenda item, first I will introduce myself. So hello, I'm Jessica. I am a digital transformation analyst here at Gravity Union. I'm also an executive board member at the ARMA Vancouver chapter, ARMA being the Association of Records Managers and Assistants. I have a Master's of Archival Studies from UBC, and overall in my work experience, I have gotten some great background in both public and private sectors as a records and information management professional, and I have a broad perspective on how implementing records and information management strategies can be best suited for modern collaborative work environments. So for our agenda today, I will start by going over some protection of information legislation around Canada and what those requirements are. So we'll begin with a privacy impact assessment overview. I'll give you some examples of how to build a risk registry and how tips and tricks for responding to FOI requests, privacy information banks. Next, we will move on to Microsoft-related resources. So I'll do a deep dive into the foundational privacy impact assessment document, as well as how it deals with data sovereignty and security measures. I'll also touch on Microsoft's data protection addendum, the DPA, and then we will move on to the Microsoft Purview portal offerings, beginning with eDiscovery and then moving on to sensitivity labels, where I'll give you the purpose of them, some tips and tricks, as well as the licensing requirements. I'll wrap up and leave you with some further resources, as well as some time at the end to have some discussion. You can ask any questions as you think of them and pop them into the Q&A there. So, protection of information. We do have a variety of Canadian-based legislation that addresses this throughout Canada. So because today's session is a bit broad, I'm not touching on any in particular, but there are some overarching recommendations and requirements that are common to all. So privacy impact assessments are either heavily recommended or required depending on your provincial privacy legislation. And so those are a way for you to assess your implementations, any initiatives within your organization, and how that will affect privacy. So today we'll be focusing on how to do a privacy impact assessment for Microsoft-based products and services that your organization uses. This will allow you to define how sensitive information, including personally identifiable information, will flow through the initiative, and it will also help you to define the risks and any recommended mitigation steps that you will be taking to address those risks. So a risk registry is a part of a privacy impact assessment. It can look a little something like this in a table, but it is of course up to you and your provincial template that you'll use for that. So this is just some very common risks that we see when working with Microsoft-related products and services. So first is over-retention of personally identifiable information, which is not having adequate processes to ensure that personal information is protected with strong access controls and retention policy increases the risk of non-compliance. So this is a quote from the data protection addendum that Microsoft releases, but something to note is that they retain customer data for 90 days past contract termination, and then will delete it within an additional 90 days past that termination date. So something to keep in mind there. And then some risk mitigation is to include processes required to classify all data within SharePoint, OneDrive Exchange to satisfy necessary retention periods. So you should be kind of looking to gauge exactly where everybody is storing that data and then try and classify it against that retention schedule to make sure that you're not over retaining that PII. And then also include processes to carry out automated or manual disposition of the data once that semi-active period or retention period is complete for that data. So this will help enforce and ensure compliance not just to relevant FIPA, ATIP acts, but also with your data retention requirements. As well, another risk mitigation step is to partake in regular information audit reports to monitor any unclassified data. So if individuals are storing information that is outside of previously scoped SharePoint sites and libraries, or audits on their OneDrive accounts. So another risk that is common to most organizations is the overcollection of PII. So this is defined as indirectly collecting or not ensuring individuals are informed about the choices available to them regarding the collection, or getting implicit or explicit consent that they are providing their personally identifiable information by participating in the services. And then some common risk mitigation tactics are to ensure minimal collection of data for things like an Active Directory account creation. So not only is private information required, or minimal private information for staff within your organization, but as well any kind of guest users or other consultants that you are working with that require an Active Directory account to access things like SharePoint, Exchange, any part of your Microsoft products and services. If you or your IT department uses batch loading of account data into Active Directory, just make sure that the batches are reviewed and any non-active users are removed from that batch before it is re-uploaded. As well, you as an organization can require privacy training for all staff to understand the responsibility to inform individuals correctly when they are involved in data collection initiatives. So this is if they are working with members of the public or those outside of the organization to collect their information. Another common risk is the oversharing of personally identifiable information. So if any part of your initiative or your business practices use PII for an alternate purpose than it was collected for, or accidentally sharing to all users of an organization when it was meant for more of a limited audience. So some steps that you can take, particularly to restrict the risk of sharing outside of the initial audience, is to require that the default sharing link to a file maintains the existing permissions for that location, be it a SharePoint site or library or a OneDrive account. It is also recommended to review configuration settings for teams and sites at implementation to ensure that PII is not exposed by location permission groups. So because we are using those as the primary way to control the access to that information when you are designing a SharePoint site or a Teams site, then just take some time to review the access and ensure that it's practicing principles of least privilege, or strategically designed to match the file requirements for that particular library. You can also recommend regular review of access links that are active on a SharePoint site. So this can be done by a SharePoint site admin to verify if the access is still needed. So you'll be able to identify any kind of broader organization-wide sharing links to particular files and just follow up with those individuals to make sure that they do in fact need to provide broad access to that file, or if that link can be broken. It is also recommended that you configure sensitivity labels to prevent external sharing and access to particularly sensitive personal information. So if you have a site or a library that, again, is strategically designed to handle this particular type of information, you can then have a firm enforcement of that sharing policy to entirely restrict that external sharing, just to have that kind of peace of mind. And I'll get, of course, into more details on that a little bit later on in the slides. So that was a brief highlight of some common risks and some ways that you can use a privacy impact assessment risk registry to recommend policies and practices within your SharePoint implementation or your broader Microsoft implementation to respect protection of personal information. Another requirement for most FIPA acts or provincial privacy legislation is the maintenance of a personal information bank. So this is a way to manage personal data within a government institutions. They act as an index of personal information that has been collected, how it is used, if it is being disclosed, how long it should be retained for, and if it is disposed of. It should be a searchable index, so you can use it to facilitate things like subject rights requests when members of the public or your own staff make a request to see the information that has been collected on their behalf through your organization and what initiatives it is involved in, as well as general governance of personally identifiable information. So it is a way to classify that within your organization. Again, it is required for government organizations across Canada, but is also generally a great practice to have, just a way to, it's a further tool for your organization to identify the information that it's collecting, why and how long it is retained for. So even if you're not a government organization, it is a very great tool. So we recommend, if this is something that you're currently practicing or looking to practice, leveraging information sensitivity classifications and sensitive information types. So these are within the Microsoft offerings in your licensing. They're a way to discover and classify sensitive information. So they are trainable classifiers that will go out and identify documents and files that are using things like credit information, passport numbers, anything like that. So you can see exactly what locations are storing that PII, and then you can associate it back to those business practices and particularly the individuals that the PII has been collected for. All right, enough about legislation. Now, here's some more practical resources that you can draw from when you're looking to create a PIA or potentially looking to revise an existing PIA. So first is Microsoft's Foundational Privacy Impact Assessment. So I'll leave this up for a second here, but it will take you to their data privacy trust portal. Amy will also be dropping that link in the chat for you to access if you don't have your phone handy. And of course, we'll be sharing the slides afterwards. So all that to say, we'll give you many means of accessing this. It is free, it's open to the public, and a great resource. All right. So as I said, publicly available. This particular document was last updated in summer of 2024, so it is fairly recent, but they do look to update them roughly every 3 years. It is done by a third party, so while it is maintained and distributed by Microsoft, it is not, strictly speaking, written by them. So it also targets particularly the Canadian legislation. So it quotes things like Privacy Act, PIPEDA, even international standards like ISO 27018. So it is a very broad document with a lot of information on how Microsoft is compliant and exactly what technical steps it takes behind the scenes to ensure the protection of your data. So this document will provide you, broadly speaking, with information to create your own PIA. So you can draw quotes from it and that kind of thing if you wish to. One thing I do particularly want to highlight is its section on how it handles customer data. So privacy authorities in Canada have uniformly interpreted the distribution of personal information to service providers such as Microsoft as being a use rather than a disclosure. So this is important to keep aware of because you don't need to send out notices to every individual that you collect information from that their data has been disclosed to Microsoft, because they are simply a software provider using that data on your behalf. But if you, as part of a particular business initiative, are then disclosing that information to other parties, then the disclosure provisions apply. As well, when you enter an agreement for service providers like Microsoft, you can identify data sovereignty requirements such as only having your customer data within Canada. So the Canadian data centers that Microsoft maintains are located in Toronto and Quebec City. It isn't possible to specify one over the other. They do share data in between them. This also helps them just respond robustly to security threats and that kind of thing, and any potential natural disasters. It's just good to have that easy duplication there. But just so you're aware, as a Canadian company, you can specify that your data is handled within Canada. If you're curious to see if this is something that your agreement already has, you can check the data location if you are a admin within your Microsoft tenant under admin settings, organization profile, and then data location. This is a quick diagram of what that kind of data flow will look like potentially. So here I am quoting the BC FIPA Act, but as I've stated, they are fairly similar across the different provinces and territories in Canada. So the first step is data is collected from individuals. So the example here I'm drawing on from more of that HR perspective. As any new employee, you will provide files to your organization with things like your personal address, family status, birth date, and other personally identifiable information. So the first step of that is, of course, the collection. And then once the data is uploaded to SharePoint, that is when it is considered in use by Microsoft and your organization. So the HR team would then upload the documents to your employee file. And then that data should be managed according to its particular life cycle. So an example of a retention period for this is that an employee file is saved for the active tenure of the employment, plus an additional 10 years, just in case the employee ever comes back to the organization. And then after that period of time, it is destroyed. So a way that you can just kind of highlight how the data is flowing throughout your M365 environment at a top level is shown here to kind of see what sections of FIPA apply to what areas of the life cycle. This all draws us to security considerations. I've mentioned a couple times, as well as in the risk registry at the beginning, that this is very important. So SharePoint does just define access at the location level by default. So for things like a document that you upload to a site, it won't automatically be visible to everybody. You have to set that permission level up at the site initially, and then have the share link inherit that permission down from the site level. So the example, keeping with the human resources theme here, is that we have a human resources hub site, and then we have branching sites off of that that maintain the same permissions for the most part. So we're designing a flat site hierarchy. Each of these are similar levels off of the hub there, and inheriting all of those permissions makes it easier to maintain, makes it easier for the employees to share the files as they need to within the HR department. But for some things, we might need a little bit more secure permissions. So in orange there, I've highlighted a manager's portal. So for example, the human resources manager would have a more secure area. So we can take the original inherited permission group from the hub there and trim it down further to just include the manager and potentially some directors, depending on how that organization is structured. So this is how you can kind of enable that location-based permission level group to satisfy the least privilege actions, as well as maintain sensitive information correctly. The next resource that I want to highlight is the Data Protection Addendum, the DPA. So this covers all Microsoft products and services. So regardless of what license or agreement you have with Microsoft, this will apply. This is also extremely regularly updated just to keep up with all the updates that Microsoft themselves is pushing out to those products. So this particular document is referring to this month's edition, September 2025. It is global, so it's not just going to speak to Canadian legislation, and it is also very informed by Europe's GDPR. And thank you, Amy, for providing the link to that in the chat as well. So this is available, of course, publicly on their website. As well, you can go to the library that it is hosted on and see all of the history of the previous documents. The one before this was released in April, so they tend to put out a new one every quarter, every 3 to 4 months. And you can kind of keep referring back to that as you need. So the data protection addendum highlights the roles and responsibilities that Microsoft undertakes as part of a licensing agreement, as well as the responsibilities that you, the customer, your organization is undertaking as a partner in that. So the primary responsibility for the data does rest with the customer, so your organization, and they consider you as the controller of personal data, sensitive data, all of that. Microsoft also maintains a list of sub-processors. So in the event that Microsoft themselves is not the only ones having access or processing your customer data or using it, as is understood in privacy information legislation, this list of sub-processors is maintained and also cited in the DPA. So it is a way of kind of highlighting the roles and responsibilities that those sub-processors take on behalf of Microsoft. This is an area that you should be aware of, as there is some potential risk of that data sharing. So as a controller of personal data, as understood in this agreement, you do have the responsibility to review the subprocessor list and make sure that it respects your individual organization's data sovereignty requirements. All data is encrypted at transit and at rest within Microsoft and its subprocessors when and if they are involved. Transit being understood as when the data is transferred between data centers and your own cloud tenant, and rest meaning while the data is not actively in use. Another couple key customer responsibilities here is to analyze the technical product and service that you, the customer, are licensing from Microsoft, including the security measures that Microsoft is taking, and determine if they satisfy your requirements. So this ties me back to maintaining an active privacy impact assessment for your Microsoft services. So they also acknowledge that this is a responsibility of the customer. So while they are providing resources and making sure that you have enough information on their security measures, you are also able to identify the extra practices that you'll need to undergo to satisfy any requirements that your organization has. So some of these I'm highlighting or recommending in this presentation. You, the customer, are also responsible for maintaining privacy protections and security measures for any devices that are accessing Microsoft products. So things like laptops, computers, cell phones, virtual machines, shared drives, anything at all that is connected to the software. So these, of course, require their own security measures just to make sure that that data is protected. And this is out of the scope for Microsoft to be able to control. They're not giving us laptops, unfortunately, for all of our licensing agreements. All right, the next area of my presentation here focuses on Microsoft Purview. So within the Microsoft ecosystem of products and services, they have provided Purview as a compliance portal specifically to address the many information requirements for their clients. There are many, many facets, many layers to Purview. So today I will be highlighting two key Purview modules that relate most directly to managing and securing information. But just so you know, this is a very high level overview. Could spend weeks talking about all of the practical implications of these Purview areas. So without further ado, we'll dive into eDiscovery. So if you're not familiar with eDiscovery already, it is a way, it's designed to help organizations identify and deliver any electronic, that's where the E comes from, information that can be used as evidence in legal cases. And these can include FOI requests. So eDiscovery as a module under Purview allows for a restricted view under a particular case for you to create a search for content related to that particular request, and then identify if the files are actually relevant to that request, and if they are, you can move forward with redacting them or disclosing them as you need to. There is, of course, many advanced elements to eDiscovery Premium. So depending on your licensing, some of these features might require a bit of extra money, but I will highlight those. So most of the screenshots that you'll see today in my presentation are the generic eDiscovery license. So if you have E3 or E5, this will be what you see. But some of them, if you want a little bit more of a fancy eDiscovery, E5 is the way to go, pretty much. We also recommend that you undergo advanced eDiscovery training. So again, this is just a quick overview so that you are familiar with some of these options. So this is a screenshot of a sample FOI case. So I have created, you'll see the top breadcrumbs there. It says cases, then recruitment files 2025. So I've created a particular case responding to kind of access request here for resumes that this organization has collected over 2025. And then under my query, I have scoped it to my HR sites because they are the ones that I've classified as maintaining the original copies of resumes as collected for recruitment. And then from that query, I have been presented with a review set here. And then opening that review set, I can see these are the files that that particular query has satisfied. And so from here, I'm able to see the documents and perform any actions on them, such as redacting that may be relevant or required for that privacy access request. And then this is a following screenshot that just shows you some of those actions. So the first being export, the next is commit redactions to PDF or add a file to another review set if it is also relevant to an additional access request. And last is a preview. So they are still coming out with new features for eDiscovery. So a query report. But the first three there are still available for just a general E3 or E5 Purview license. They do not require eDiscovery Premium. And then if you want to select multiple, you can simply export them. If you do use any other like PDF processing like Adobe, you can also ingest them from the review set here into that. So the next area of purview that I want to highlight is the information protection module, because this is where you'll see sensitivity labels. So information sensitivity labels are featured under here. They allow your organization to classify and protect their data based on particular sensitivity levels. So you'll see by default here, it's identified 5 main levels, but there are subsections under general, confidential, and highly confidential. As well, you can create custom sensitivity levels beyond these just to satisfy, again, the particular requirements for the data that your organization maintains. And this is a way to help ensure that any sensitive content, including personally identifiable information, is handled appropriately. So things like sharing is respected. So what exactly can sensitivity labels do? They can define a level of protection and access controls and act as a visual reminder of data handling requirements. So unlike ways that we configure things like retention labels, which can be a little hidden on a document themselves, sensitivity labels are quite front and center. So end users will be able to see when they are applied, and that can itself act as a bit of a reminder that this is a confidential document and not to share it out more broadly. But then you can, of course, layer on more restrictive access controls, requiring a user to authenticate with MFA or an additional authentication method if you require that, as well as restricting the sharing to only internal users. And excluding access to external users, or something softer like external users can only view the document and not edit or download the document. As well, simply labeling content. So even if you're not enforcing any kind of access control, and simply using it as that kind of visual reminder, you can also create a usage report. So just another way for your organization to see what information it is managing associated to particular business practices. So going back to our HR example, The employee files are related to that recruitment initiative, and they should only be used within that HR library and HR site. So a usage report with all of those files labeled with a corresponding sensitivity label will be able to identify where those are and how they're being used. You can also, another example here is see the frequency at which files labeled as confidential across your organization have been downloaded, just to get a sense of if there are any other gaps in your Microsoft ecosystem. As well, sensitivity labels can be an excellent tool in helping to govern Copilot agents or third-party external AI. But particularly for Copilot, they will inherit a sensitivity label to a chat response. So here, particularly calling out that you have Copilot for Teams and you are a user asking that Copilot agent a question about the files that you have access to, and it responds drawing from information on files that have a sensitivity label. The response that it is giving you within the chat will also inherit that sensitivity label. So you'll be able to see it on the chat response, as well as if you are enforcing access controls, it will restrict you from sharing that response to external parties, for example. Sensitivity labels can also directly block file processing when configured with a corresponding data loss prevention policy. So another facet of Purview. Sorry, I know this is very high level and a lot of information, but data loss prevention, another module there. They can work in tandem with each other. If you want to say that a sensitivity label of the highest classification should not ever be crawled by any AI, including Copilot, so that the contents of those files will remain strictly confidential. You can ensure that users are not exploiting or potentially oversharing that data with other AI agents. So I've talked about it being very visible. This is just a quick screenshot of that. So within my project site here, I have a library specifically for contracts and agreements. I have uploaded one file so far, and this file has automatically inherited a sensitivity label. This one is fairly open. It is just for that visual reminder that this should be all employee access, but not maybe external access past my particular organization. And so that is highlighted there. As well, because the sensitivity label is stored in the metadata of a document, it is available for third-party apps and services to write to and read from the metadata itself. So this means that if you want to leverage things, if you're a particularly adept software developer or have access to those wonderful IT resources, use the Microsoft Protection SDK to fully support labeling and encryption capabilities across multiple different platforms. As well, this means that the sensitivity label is tied directly to the file itself when you apply it at this level. However, there are sensitivity labels that apply to containers as well. This is a view. I've opened the document itself. So again, just a quick example of how visible this sensitivity label is to end users. They can display this little information blurb here that details exactly how you want this classification, the sensitivity classification, to be handled. So a reminder, organization data that isn't intended for public consumption, but is available to all employees. You need to share with external partners, make sure it's appropriate with the data owners, and relabel a content as general. You can, of course, customize this description however you need to for your organization, but it is that way to directly engage with end users on how they should be protecting their documents. All right, container sensitivity labels. So as I briefly mentioned, they are different from a file-specific label. So a file label is essentially things in the data that's available directly on the file and can embed itself directly into the document for visibility, but you can also apply a sensitivity label to a container, which means either a Teams group, a Microsoft 365 group, or a SharePoint site as a whole. So these do not transfer directly to the items on a site or group. So if it's a group, things like chat messages and that will not inherit the label directly, but it can restrict sharing or how the information is kind of transferred out of that particular container. So we could apply a container sensitivity label to a human resources site, again, to restrict sharing past that team. Site owners and group owners can change container labels, but site members and general end users would not be able to change that container label. So they can work alongside a file label if it is a similar kind of permission level. As well, I want to highlight again, brief call out to what is and isn't available on the different licenses. So there is two main methods that sensitivity labels can be applied. The first is, of course, automated. So this will allow you to configure a policy to apply either container or item level sensitivity labels automatically when they satisfy certain requirements. So just all group enabled sites could contain or have a container sensitivity label applied to them, or particularly for files of a certain type on a site, they would automatically get a sensitivity label of general or confidential applied to them. This does require that higher level E5 license. So it is a little bit more expensive, a little bit fancy, but it is the best for a kind of default baseline protection because it doesn't require that direct end user involvement. And it is a way to kind of enforce broadly all of these configurations and information protection that you want to maintain for your organization as a whole. The other method is manual. So this will provide protection once selected on an individual file basis or manually applied to a site by the site owner. This just requires an E3 license. It is also available if you have an E5 license, and it is good for that more targeted user-controlled protection. So if you are really advanced in training end users on, again, their requirements for privacy legislation, and they understand exactly what these particular sensitivity labels will enforce and what files they are targeted towards, then this is a great method. It is a way to really, again, identify those documents and make sure that that sharing is restricted. So because there are multiple methods, especially if you have the E5 license available, there is a potential for conflicts to occur. So this is, for example, when more than one label applies to a location. So you have a very broad policy applying sensitivity labels to contain or all group connected sites, and a more specific policy that is applying a sensitivity label to a particular type of group connected sites, for example, human resources sites, or if multiple documents with different labels are shared within a Copilot chat dialogue. So again, it will always pull from information that the user has access to. And this could contain documents with a bunch of different sensitivity labels. The hierarchy will be maintained. So the label with the highest security will take precedence over that particular chat response or the container level application of the sensitivity label. So the more restrictive one will take priority over the more open and general one, just as a general rule. But as well, if a user is able to manually apply a sensitivity label, that will override the automatic application of the sensitivity label. So something to keep in mind there as well, regardless of your application approach. Communication is always key with end users. So make sure that they understand exactly what the uses of these sensitivity labels are for and what actions they will be taking. Some prerequisites for implementation. So with all of these kind of key things in mind, I just want to highlight those. Licenses, we generally recommend E5 licensing to be able to use the information protection well. E3 will give you some level of protection, but there is a risk of it being a little bit more patchy and some gaps being revealed because end users have a varying degree of proficiency with these methods. As well, permissions should be very carefully configured for each area, and the labels can then help facilitate the restrictions on that. And then to be able to create and publish labels, there is a very specific purview role group, the information protection roles, that the records manager should be, or the privacy officer or the IT professional should have. And that is also in the compliance administrator. So if you are looking for more broader purview access, compliance administrator is recommended. It gives you access into things like the data loss prevention portal, as well as other areas within purview. And then in the fine print as well, just be aware that site owners and SharePoint admins can change a label once it has been applied to a site. So that manual application permission is available in the default permission groups of the SharePoint sites. So as I've said many times, configure those directly. As well, it is definitely recommended to enable PDF support. So sensitivity labels will be able to be applied to Office-based files, so things like Word, Excel, or PowerPoint, but definitely for an organization that maintains other file types, including PDFs, turn this on as well. So this is just a one and done setting at your kind of global Microsoft tenant level. And lastly, have a clear naming convention. So this ensures that each label name is unique and references its intended use. So if you are creating a really specific one, have that very clear in the name as well if it does have any strong restrictions associated with that label name. This is, again, because sensitivity labels are quite visible for end users and everybody within your organization. So clear names are definitely a must to make sure that they are used responsibly and everybody is aware exactly what will happen when they enable that label. So to wrap up, give us a couple minutes for questions. Just want to leave you with some key takeaways from this. So if you haven't already, I recommend reviewing those Microsoft resources and outline a comprehensive risk mitigation table in your privacy impact assessment for your organization. As well, leverage Purview Information Protection sensitivity labels to provide classification and help address some of those oversharing risks. And just generally keep in mind that any and all software is only a framework designed with security in mind at all stages when creating sites, groups, and teams, so correct permissions will inherit down. I will also, this is just a quick link to the Privacy and Data Protection Trust Center. So this is where the Foundational Privacy Impact Assessment is located, but it also contains a bunch more documents that may or may not be relevant to the particular products that your organization is using, as well as more global documents as well. So if your organization is not just in the Canadian sphere, that might be relevant to you as well. But it is generally just a great location to review. I've also completed a privacy impact assessment tips and tricks blog post. So that is available for you to draw on there. And now I will leave you some time to ask any questions. Do we have any from the Q&A spot?
That was great, Jessica. Thank you. There's a few that have come in. So I'll start with the first one. Are there any other Purview solutions that you personally would recommend using?
Yeah, absolutely. It is, I mean, so heavily transformed in the recent years. Microsoft is always coming up with new Purview tools and enhancing the existing ones. So I mainly focused on eDiscovery and information protection today, but the data loss prevention module is also really good. The audit module is where you will find ways that you can do general content searches throughout your information that in your Microsoft tenant, as well, of course, the records management module for things like retention policies, and that can be working very closely in tandem to the more privacy side of information protection. So all of those highly recommend getting training and diving deep into.
Great, thank you. Another one here. What practices, again, would you recommend for increasing end user adoption?
Keeping communication channels open at all times. So just making yourself very available to end users. Oftentimes, this is done when they're initially onboarded and then kind of left alone. So just make sure that you're checking in or otherwise kind of touching on maybe piggybacking more kind of global organization-wide communications so that end users know where to go to whenever they have questions. That one is the easiest to enforce and address, but if you're able to just generally champion these requirements within your executive level management and just make sure that they are also having a similar, they're sharing your mindset with these kind of risk mitigation steps and the reason why you're enforcing certain policies, that can help as well. So it's not just communication coming from you, it's communication coming from the organization as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. On the collaboration front and sort of sharing documents, question here, is it good to use shared channels and teams to manage permissions or use document libraries with unique permissions within a SharePoint site?
Yeah, great question. I would say generally speaking, our implementations, so a best practice that Gravity Union enforces is to favor document library with unique permissions on a SharePoint site approach over shared channels. This is in part because shared channels create a background SharePoint site that is standalone, but also connected to the parent. Long term, we just see a lot of confusion resulting from this and some limitations on being able to manage that shared channel SharePoint site directly. So that is our kind of rationale. Of course, there are, unique circumstances where shared channels are better than a trimmed down document library. So I can't speak for all times there, but just, yeah, generally speaking, we try to use unique permissions on a document library as the more preferred method. Of course, setting a permission level on the site is our first line of defense. So making sure that that is also maintained and is not overly permissive either is very recommended.
Hmm. Absolutely. If you don't mind, if you want to navigate back to slide 31, there's a
Mhm.
question here. Could you please provide more information on ShareLink and best practices on sharing and collaborating on documents in the M365 environment?
Yeah. So the share link is what you will get when you either click the copy link action or if you click share and then just immediately copy the link from that dialog box. So it is possible to set a default share link configuration when users do that. This is, of course, the fastest way to share a file. So it's important to kind of have the default inherit this existing user access over the more permissive level of all organization wide. So this is something that you can set both at the tenant level. So you can disable things like that anyone can use this link as being the default or even being available for end users to use, as well as set more kind of like generic defaults of maintain the existing permission groups. And then there is a more restrictive level underneath that of require users to input exactly who they want to share this file to. So instead of just being able to copy a link, they would have to use a share dialog box to name an individual correctly to associate that link to. So the link will not work for anybody that, even if the link is sent to other folks outside of that particular user, it won't work for them. And it's just a way to, again, really identify what users are having access to that document.
Perfect. Thank you. I see one more here. So if there's any others who have questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. Jessica, this one is a bit strategic, so we'll see if it makes sense to sort of answer this here. There's a link that's been posted. What about Microsoft's stance on data sovereignty law in Canada versus the US? How will this affect data privacy in Canada? Do you have an opinion on that or any thoughts?
Yeah, so generally speaking, like I do think Microsoft takes every and all precaution available to them to respect data sovereignty. I know in BC we have had more restrictive legislation in place in the past where um, any government organizations within BC needed to maintain their data within BC directly, not even broadly within Canada. So that definitely was a challenge in using platforms like Microsoft. So now it is a little bit more open as long as it's within Canada that is allowed. But I did kind of highlight those sub-processors are often located outside of Canada. So if your products include some things, some additional services. I think off the top of my head, things like Microsoft Defender, the Power App platform can sometimes involve external subprocessors. So you should definitely review that list and see where they're located and exactly what data they're involved in managing on Microsoft's behalf and identify for your organization if that is something that you want to continue letting them have access to, or if there are other tools that you want to switch ahead instead.
Hey, that was great. Thank you. I think we've come to an end of all our questions. We are at the end of time here. So I will very quickly just highlight that there's a few really great events we're going to be at coming up. Let me get to those slides real quick.
I will
There we
be
go.
at the
Yeah.
Microsoft Community Days conference in Ottawa, along with some of my very esteemed colleagues here at GU. So if you're attending that, Very exciting. I will see you there. We will also be going to ARMA InfoCon in Phoenix at the end of October. And we have an additional webinar up that will focus on Copilot, how to build agent AI for municipalities.
Great. Thank you, Jessica, once again. Really great session. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And thanks again, Jessica.
Thank you all.